today? You should be looking at a photo of a lovely Louisiana pine snake. Jan and I talked about this earlier. It kind of looks like a bull snake. We will talk about this species a little later in, but Louisiana pine snake is a snake that quite possibly none of us will ever see in Texas, but we'll talk about that. Anyway, so we're going to talk about conservation tonight. This is not going to be a survey of like different species of reptiles and amphibians. I want to highlight some and tell their story a little bit, but a lot of this is going to be about what's the conservation problem and why should we care and what can we do. So let's see, here we go. And I think all of you are familiar with this, but just to, quickly reviewing what we mean when we talk about herps, is that we're talking about amphibians, which on a worldwide basis includes frogs and toads, salamanders, and caecilians, where a caecilian is an eel-like looking amphibian, no legs. They're tropical. We don't have any in North America. But they're pretty cool. You can look them up. They're pretty neat. And then reptiles, including turtles and tortoises, crocodilians, which we have the American crocodile on the tip of Florida, but otherwise it's the American alligator all through the country. Tuataras, which some of you know, that's a New Zealand little relic, like a dinosaur relic, right? Looks kind of like a lizard, but lives just along one edge of New Zealand and off on some islands there. And then lizards and snakes. So those are herps. And let's start by talking about why is conservation so hard? Because, you would think, gosh, we just ought to do it, right? Conservation is about humans sharing a patch of habitat, an ecoregion, a state, a continent, the oceans, the earth. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when you were in kindergarten, was sharing hard? Not like you can speak up and tell me, but I think we would agree that at least early in our development, sharing is hard because we just sort of want for ourselves what's out there. And then we learn as we grow and are taught that we share things with the rest of the community. And so we, didn't hit little Johnny when he took our toy or whatever. This is, and I don't mean to make light of it because I think this is on a completely different level, a much more mature level, a much more abstract level. Conservation is about sharing, and sharing with others who are less powerful than you is hard. So if we see all the world around us, if basically we see, Sheri Capehart is a place for our entertainment, we can do with it whatever we want to, and we don't really owe anything to the preserve. It's just ours to toy with, so to speak. If we think of the Amazon basin as a place where we can drill for oil and cut down trees and make farms and raise beef cattle, because after all, it's ours. Who's to stop us? That attitude comes from, we haven't really quite learned what we need to about sharing yet, right? So at least my own point of view, everybody may not share it, but my own point of view is that, the rest of the things that live on the planet, those living things are, almost like relatives. They are things that deserve some respect and some sharing of the land. And that, of course, becomes difficult when we can make money off the land, when we can harvest things and use things and all that. We may not want to share it. Okay, so what does that have to do with reptiles and amphibians? So herps face a number of really significant threats. And anybody that's seriously interested in reptile and amphibian conservation, I hope you get a copy of, or have a copy, or you can look it up or email me and I'll send you a copy of Whit Gibbons and a bunch of other people, an article from 26 years ago called The Global Decline of Reptiles, Deja Vu Amphibians. And that's because amphibians face similar threats, but reptiles are also under threat. And they documented that reptiles are declining, in fact, and here are the kinds of threats that they face. And this is still true. And when you think about it, I mean, a lot of you are naturalists, and you may not be as familiar with herps, but birds, plants, other, and I bet you're going to find that these things apply to almost everything, right? Not just herps. So the first one is habitat loss and degradation. That is the big one. That's probably more important than anything else. So that when something needs a particular kind of habitat to live, and that gets bulldozed if we build stuff on it, if we poison it, if we drain the wetland, then they can't live there anymore. And it's not like they can pack their bags and move to LA. It's like they just die off. So that's the biggest one. Introduced invasive species is a real issue. And one example I could mention would be with, ironically, with the American bullfrog, which is native here. It's native throughout the eastern U.S., but out west, people took those things out there because they like to eat frog legs, and bullfrogs are real big and they have great big legs to cook up. And some of those bullfrogs escaped, and they outcompete the native California red-legged frog, for example. So it's an introduced invasive species out there. Um, but we have all kinds of introduced invasive species all over the place, right? I mean, think about fire ants, right? So where did fire ants come from? They came from South America, and they were introduced through the port of Mobile, Alabama, if I remember correctly, quite a few years ago, and are spreading, starting with southeastern U.S. and spreading around everywhere. That ant doesn't really belong here, and it does really well here. And a lot of our stuff doesn't have much of a defense against it. So those are things that are really detrimental to herps. And then there's environmental pollution. Um, and that needs almost no examples. Everybody can think about, either pesticides, agricultural runoff, other kinds of things that pollute waters and pollute land and kill things off. There's disease and parasitism, and we're going to talk more about disease in particular with amphibians later on. But disease and parasitism are threats for reptiles and amphibians, for sure. And then there's unsustainable use. Um, that's one where we've kind of made some headway over the years, maybe at least in the U.S. I can remember a time when uh, people would, Bobby Joe would go out and collect a pickup truck worth of box turtles and sell them off for beer money or whatever. Like you don't make big money, but the export to Asia in turtles overall, box turtles, and then of course red-eared sliders and other sliders and snapping turtles and soft-shell turtles and all of that was a very big business. Luckily, Texas outlawed the commercial harvest of native turtles some years ago, and that has helped. But and you could point to a lot of things with unsustainable use. Among the things that played a role in losing horned lizards, right, is the kids that would run around collect horny toads and sell them into the pet trade. And of course, the really tragic, the even more tragic thing about that, of course, is, as I think all of you know, horned lizards are extremely difficult to keep in captivity unless you really invest a lot of time and energy and knowledge into it. And so basically all those lizards died. But they were collected all over the place. This is one of the things that helped bring horned lizards down. And then global climate change, everything from increased drought and unpredictable weather to maybe flooding coastline to, reptiles and amphibians, as you remember from our earlier discussions, they're ectotherms. They depend on external temperature to be right in order to be active. And we talk mostly about hibernation, and when it's really cold, and they go uh, into burrows and beneath things for protection from freezing and all of that. But it's also true that when the temperature is too high, that will kill herps. And really increased temperatures are a threat in a number of ways. One of which is about temperature dependent sex determination. We have a number of herp species uh, that have that method of determining if the baby's developing in eggs will be male or female. Crocodilians are one, turtles are another. And so when you have overall higher average incubation temperatures, you're going to get it skewed to one sex. And when you get population skewed too badly to one sex, the reproduction doesn't happen very well. The populations may not sustain themselves. So all of those things are significant threats to herps. And then what we have to ask is, who cares? I mean, and you can ask that like, who cares? And there's some of that, right? There are people who would say, who cares? I don't care about no bugs and no lizards. And, I mean, they might care about other species. And then we could also ask it as, well, who's doing the caring? Like, let's find out who's doing stuff, and let's learn from what they're doing. But some people care about herps, especially exotics, as pets. Like that Australian water dragon pictured there. That is, it's not widely kept as a pet, but they are highly prized by some people who like lizards. And people would put a lot of attention into that, or people do put a lot of attention into conserving some of the Caribbean iguana species. But for just our average reptiles and amphibians that live in the US, it's a hard sell sometimes, right? People like horny toads. Generally, people like box turtles. But it's a hard sell to say, yeah, we think that the potential disappearance of this rattlesnake ought to be of concern to you, and we ought to do something about it. Not that many people are going to want to do that. But why should we care? I think one of the things is that, well, I'll get to that in just a second, I guess. And then how can we translate caring about them into conservation action? And I want to talk about that some in our presentation tonight. So I want you to take just a moment, think about if you were going to start a conservation nonprofit and you want to pick a species to personify your effort. You want a logo animal. So take a moment. What do you choose to go on your logo and to feature in your work with the public? You probably want something that pulls in people's care and compassion, right? If you're going to do a conservation nonprofit, basically your job is to get people to care enough to take action and maybe contribute to your organization. So what are you going to pick? And I'm betting that you didn't pick the tooth cave pseudoscorpion, right? Raise your hand if you, anyway, never mind. Or maybe the Austin blind salamander. I mean, those things don't pull in the public overall very much. So maybe you just stick with the cute panda. Again, my point being, conserving reptiles and amphibians is a harder sell than conserving pandas or golden cheek warblers or other animals like that. So, but biodiversity means y'all means all, right? That's the takeaway that I'd like for you to think about when you leave. Y'all means all, even when it's not obvious what ecosystem services a species may provide. So we, those of us who want to conserve stuff, and we come up with all these things about, well, this animal gives us this medicine, this animal does this for us, these, butterflies are pollinators and our crops depend on it. And all of that is true and all of it's valid. But, even if we don't know what they provide, they deserve to be here. Here's a quote from Aldo Leopold, and I like, especially those of you who are master naturalists probably know Aldo Leopold, or if you don't, please go get him. Those of you who haven't read any Aldo Leopold, please do. The quote is, if the land mechanism as a whole is good, then every part is good, whether we understand it or not. If the biota in the course of eons has built something we like but do not understand, then who but a fool would discard seemingly useless parts? Yeah, Aldo Leopold was writing, the last century, and it kind of shows that the style of wording. But you get the message, right? It's like if we like nature, but we don't totally understand it, maybe we ought to keep all of it. The game that I'd like for you to think about as an example here is Jenga. Anybody played Jenga? I know, like you can all raise your hand and I'll see it, right? Um, so Jenga is that game where you have a tower of wooden blocks, and the idea is you pull out one block at a time. You take turns pulling them out, and let's see who can pull the most blocks out before the whole thing falls down. And communities of animals and plants are kind of like Jenga games. Uh, Ecosystems are like Jenga games. Um, if all the pieces are there, it's pretty solid and it's pretty stable. But the more stuff you take out, the more unstable it becomes, and eventually it may collapse. And we really don't want that. So if you could do something, think of a herp species that you would want to help by knowing its status and conserving it. So, and we're not going to really talk about, like I did this a little bit in a live presentation. We can't do it here, but just use it as a guide for thinking about what we're going to talk about here. If there was a kind of herp that you wanted to help, you'd want to know these kinds of things. How could you observe and document it? What would you need to know about its natural history? How could you know its status? That is it increasing? Is it stable? Is it declining? Like, how could you know that for sure? That's a really tough question. And if it's declining, what could you do to stop the decline or return it to its previous status? And what could you tell others about why it's worth the investment? A lot of this stuff is pretty involved stuff, right? This is hard. Conserving is hard. But think about it as we talk about some of these things. Let's start with this guy here. So an ornate box turtle. A lot of you remember these guys. I bet you either may not be seeing them at all, or you might not be seeing them as much as you used to. If you live somewhere where you're seeing them as much as you did 40 years ago, please let me know. I want to go take some pictures. These guys they're in real trouble. So here's some things about their natural history that kind of fit in what we were just talking about, some of the information you want to know. One of the things is they have a really small home range. And you see that stuff on the internet sometimes. People will say, they live in like half a football field, and if you take them out of that, they'll die, which is a little bit of an oversimplification, but yeah, there's definitely some truth to that. Their home range varies a little bit, but it's pretty small, and they get to know it really well, and they want to stay put. They have what would be called high site fidelity, meaning if you take them somewhere, they're not going to stay put. They're going to wander. They know where they live, and they want to live there, and they want to be around familiar stuff. So that's their deal. They have a very low reproductive rate. It's not like frogs that are laying, thousands of eggs. Mostly just one clutch a year. It's not a lot of eggs. Very high predation of eggs and juveniles, so that raccoons dig up turtle nests. They love to do that. The juveniles are just food for crows and raccoons and whatever. Most of that stuff gets killed off and eaten. By the time they get to be adults, they have few predators, right? They're big enough. The shell's pretty hard. They can close up inside there. They have relatively few predators as adults, but the babies, man, no, predators all over the place. So very few of them make it to adulthood. Also, they are omnivorous. Like they'll eat strawberries and they'll eat all kinds of things that we like. They'll eat, um, but they also like to dig through cow dung and eat dung beetles. So I guess there the similarity. You can feed your backyard box turtle a banana and think, yeah, man, he's just like me. And then when they start munching on bugs, maybe not, right? And they're often found in grassland and semi-arid habitat. So these are not the turtles you would expect to find in heavy woodland and wetter areas, although they do like a good soak. But you're really more likely to find them in prairies, um, and even out toward the desert, as long as there's some ponds or some source of water, at times. So those are some natural history pieces about box turtles that would be helpful to know if you wanted to help them out. So let's look at where you find ornate box turtles. And I'm just using this as an example to look at some things that are bigger issues than just ornate box turtles. Here's a map from Ken Dodd's book, North American Box Turtles, which is wonderful if you like box turtles. And when you look at the map, it's talking about Ornata ornata and Ornata luteola, which was called the desert box turtle. That's kind of been subsumed under ornate for now. So it's all one thing. The map is based on sources from 1978 and 1992. So it reflects how they were found back then. All those dots showing where they've been found. That's so these range maps that you see in field guides and in places like this are basically historical pieces, right? If you want to find out, so how about now? Where would you find them now? Maybe there, or maybe that has shrunk, and often we don't know. But now, ornate box turtles are a species of greatest conservation need, and so let's talk about that. Herp conservation needs in Texas. Texas Parks and Wildlife has a list of species of greatest conservation need, and those basically the idea is these are species that, due to limited distribution or declining populations, face the threat of extirpation, meaning disappearing, or like disappearing in a limited area, or extinction, which is disappearing altogether, but they lack legal protection. So that's the SGCN list, is stuff that's in need, but it's not being protected. Anyway, let's look broader than that. Look at amphibians in Texas. We have 18 frog, toad, and salamander species that are listed as threatened or endangered. And that means that basically that you can't collect them. It doesn't mean a whole lot more than that, but it means that. And then there are other species like Woodhouse's toad that are on the species of greatest conservation need, but are not listed as threatened or endangered. So, if you want to get acquainted with what's going on in Texas, you kind of have to learn several lists and learn how some of this works. In Texas, there are 19 turtle, snake, and lizard species that are shown as threatened or endangered. But there's a lot of others, like the Dunes sagebrush lizard, which we'll talk about later, and box turtles that are on the species of greatest conservation need. So they're not protected, they're just in need. We're just acknowledging, yeah, they're in some trouble, but we're not really doing, well, we're not doing much legally. I don't want to discount what Parks and Wildlife does. Parks and Wildlife does a lot of cool stuff. And we won't be able to go into all of that, but they are doing a lot of cool things, even with some of the things that are not legally protected. Okay, let's talk about NatureServe for a moment, which is a listing. It's a ranking system, and it's a factor in conservation decisions like the ones we were just talking about. So it originated from a network of state natural heritage programs. The Nature Conservancy started those long ago. And it became NatureServe around 2000. Its website says that we work with 60 plus network organizations and nearly 1,000 conservation professionals to collect, analyze, and deliver biodiversity knowledge. So this is like an organization that collects data and tries to sort out what's going on with stuff, right? And by the way, iNaturalist data are contributing to NatureServe rankings. So good on everybody who is listing stuff on iNaturalist. And I mean, and by the way, NatureServe is not just herps. It's like, you can go to their website and look at almost anything, and it will give you rankings. So not just herps. So anyway, iNat data are really helping with this. So that's one of the ways we can help conservation right there, right? And if you look at the status ranking over at the side there, it ranges from presumed extirpated, means in a certain area it's gone, uh, and possibly extirpated, which is Louisiana for the ornate box turtle, or critically imperiled, which is kind of at the northern limits of its range. Anyway, all the way down to secure, which in some of the Great Plains, well, Kansas and Nebraska, it's shown as secure. In Texas, it's shown as vulnerable. Now, what I think that means is that there are places in Texas that the ornate box turtle is not disappearing, and then there are other places that it's in pretty bad shape. So overall, in Texas, they consider it vulnerable. That probably underestimates it, but there you go. Okay, so how does Texas decide what to list, how to do it? And I talked with Paul Crump, who's the state herpetologist for Texas Parks and Wildlife, about this, and to get the lowdown about how this works. And what he told me is that in Texas, endangered listings are state listings. They have to mirror the federal listings. So we have 3 reptiles. They're all sea turtles: the hawksbill, Kemp's Ridley, and leatherback sea turtles. And there are 4 amphibians and 3 salamanders and the Houston toad. So those are listed as endangered, and it's simply because they're federally listed as endangered. The state doesn't really have any leeway about what to do about that. But decisions about what to say is threatened, here's how that works. If they're likely to become endangered in the future, if NatureServe ranking is imperiled or critically imperiled, so if you look back at that ranking, it was S1 or S2, critically imperiled or imperiled, then the species is automatically added to the threatened list. If it's vulnerable, according to NatureServe, then it can be listed if they have justification. And if NatureServe said it was apparently secure, it reading between the lines, Paul didn't say this, but it would probably be kind of like, no way. It would need a lot of justification, because Texas is not, as most of you know, Texas is not real eager to list a bunch of stuff. So that's the way the listings work in Texas. Okay, there's another ranking system to be aware of, and a lot of you may be aware of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN. They maintain a red list. Again, much more than just herps. You could go look at birds, you could go look at mammals, inverts, lots of things on IUCN. Their website says our members include expert and influential government, non-government, and indigenous peoples organizations from over 160 countries, and our commissions draw upon more than 17,000 experts. In other words, they're trying to make this a worldwide, credible, valid ranking of where stuff stand. And the red list shows species that are threatened with extinction worldwide. Their ranking system is shown below, and the ranking for the ornate box turtle is shown as near threatened. So that's, unlike NatureServe, it doesn't break it out by state. This is a worldwide thing. And so across its entire range in the US, it's considered near threatened by IUCN. So how do we know this stuff? And I think for many species, we don't, right? 17% or more of the IUCN evaluated reptile species are data deficient. And to know this stuff, we need to measure change over time and over large areas. So one way is to find the same animals over time. So you could mark them in some way, radio track them, um, that kind of stuff. Um, so, for example, some researchers will train dogs to find them. Box turtles are one example, horned lizards are another. Others may attach something and find them using technology, either radios or something else. We'll talk about that with horned lizards. Um, and it can be done with box turtles. Gosh, one of the really cool things with box turtles, I don't know if people still do this, but it was really cool, very low tech and pretty cool. They attach they call them thread trailers. So they would stick a spool of thread, glue it on a spindle on the turtle's back and attach it to something. So the turtle is free to go its way and it's going to unspool thread wherever it goes. So you could literally look at every single place that turtle has been. Really time intensive, but a pretty interesting way of tracking them. Anyway, so other other people may use artificial refuges, like with some snakes, they'll use cover boards, meaning you put out chunks of plywood and let it settle in, and so it becomes a flat, protective thing that snakes can get under. And then you go check those cover boards periodically and see if there's anything under them. So there's a variety of ways like that to keep track of animals over time. You could look at the size and age classes. And what I mean by that, we kind of hinted at that before. If you have something where you're only seeing adults and you never see babies, then what does that tell you? One example is box turtles, and I know examples people have told me about where populations of box turtles I can't remember the term Bill Belzer told me he uses for that, where it's like people still find box turtles, and so they think they're doing all right because they live a real long time, but they never see baby box turtles, they never see young ones. And what that tells you is that there's no new generations coming up. When this cohort of animals dies off, they're done, they're gone. Um, and is their habitat shrinking or degraded? That's one kind of information that would help you know their status. Um, so it takes lengthy and labor-intensive field of research to get this information that we would need to know their status. And of course, I just said in the previous slide, an earlier slide, INAT is helping with NatureServe. So the answer to my question down there is community science like iNaturalist helping? Obviously, the answer is yes. And again, it's a good thing for us to do. Okay, so let's talk about an example here with the Texas garter snake. Those of you who know me know, like, that's just an obsession of mine. I'm just sort of like, you know, yeah, Texas garter snakes. I've liked these things since I was a kid. They have been uncommon in North Texas since I was a kid, based on all my wanderings at any rate. I never found very many. Um, People generally don't find very many. Um, in fact, they tried, so some people I know tried to do a study on Texas garter snakes a few years back. And in the field seasons of 2013, 2014, uh, the grad student who was working on this found precisely zero. So it's not like a common snake, right? Now, if you look at INAT, and I believe me, I've done this. If anybody goes and looks at Texas garter snake filters, for that, you'll find observations in North Texas. They just sort of pop up kind of unpredictably. There's a few places where they're a little bit more likely to pop up, but basically they're in trouble. And well, at any rate, um, so we have few studies. The one that they tried mainly had to use museum records and that sort of stuff. So it's hard to know what's going on with these guys. But NatureServe considers them to be critically imperiled. And the subspecies is on Parks and Wildlife's species of greatest conservation need. If you remember, that one says they're in trouble, but we're not protecting them. And the reason it gets no protection is it's like this one quirky little science thing. A lot of you know that biologists, a good number of biologists, consider that species level is about as far as you go. And subspecies are really just regional variations on a species. They don't really count that from the standpoint of some biologists. And so if that's true, the Texas garter snake is just a subspecies of what's either called the common garter snake or the eastern garter snake, and there's two or three other Thamnophis sertalis, which is the genus and species. And if you do it that way, if you say, well, it's nothing special, it's just another one of those Thamnophis sertalis, then no, it doesn't count because overall they're not really in trouble. But this one is. So that's just how conservation can get weird when you're trying to keep track of and when you care about some of these Texas herps. Okay, now let's bounce over to talking about some of the threats again. And we mentioned disease. One of them that's beginning to show up in Texas is snake fungal disease. It's a fungal disease that results in skin lesions in snakes. It's often fatal. It's mainly documented in the eastern United States. And the primary cause, it's Ophidiomyces ophidiocola, has been detected now in East Texas. Now, a lot of you know white nose syndrome in bats. You can almost kind of think of that as analogous, maybe. I'm not saying it's not the same thing. It's a different fungus, but it's a fungal thing that spells real trouble for these species. And you've got these, I borrowed some photos here of snakes infected with snake fungal disease. Now, the one thing that makes it hard is that snakes come out of hibernation often with some lesions on the skin. They've been sitting with their temperatures low, which means their metabolism is low, which means their immune function is low. So they can't defend themselves very well. And sometimes they're sheltering in a kind of a damp space. As a matter of fact, if the space is too dry where they spend the winter, that'll kill them. So they may be in a damp place where the skin can start getting infected and they don't have the immune activity to fight it off. And so they come out with lesions. But if it's not snake fungal, if it's not this organism, usually after a shed or two, it's okay. So you'll see snakes with spots on them that may be all right, but some of them, especially if they're bad, may be snake fungal disease, which is fatal. And you can, if you look into it, if some of you want to look into who's studying this and whose lab wants to hear from us, you could probably, send a species there, send a specimen there for them to check, because we really do need to keep track of how is this spreading in Texas. Okay, other fungal diseases in amphibians this time. And this is the big one, right? A lot of you have heard that amphibians are in big trouble worldwide. People talk about with frogs an amphibian extinction crisis, which I think is not overstating it. The organism is called, the disease is called chytridiomycosis, which is easier to say, or you can just shorten it to chytrid. It's an infectious disease of amphibians. It's caused by the fungus Batrachochytrium dendrobatidis. Just call it chytrid. And it infects the skin and it's fatal. It basically interferes with, if you remember from when we talked several sessions ago about amphibians, and we talked about the skin and how that works, and that oxygen and water transfer across the skin pretty easily, right? And a lot of amphibians depend on transfer of oxygen across the skin about as much as they do through the lungs. So what happens is that it interferes, it keratinizes and interferes with the function of the skin and screws up electrolytes. They have heart attacks and die. So it's present in Texas, but we don't know very much about where it is exactly. It requires bodies of water and it dies, the fungus dies above 82 degrees. Well, so that kind of tells you that in Texas, there might be a lot of pretty safe places because our water gets pretty warm sometimes. People who do research with frogs and toads and and salamanders too, for that matter. Will usually use gloves, nitrile gloves, and they'll you have a disinfectant for between visits in places, and a lot of that is about this sort of thing, so that they don't transfer chytrid from one pond to the next. Um, a related fungus, uh, it's a different species of the same Batrachochytrium fungus, can infect salamanders. And the story about that is apparently it originated in China and it's gone through the pet trade, uh, which I'm not, in many respects, I'm not a fan of the pet trade. This is one in which I'm definitely not a fan of the pet trade at all. It spread to Europe through the pet trade. And so it is decimating European salamanders. It's been a real problem for some of their species. United States, the eastern U.S. in particular, is a real hotbed for salamanders. Like worldwide, it's a really very rich place for salamanders. And you know what herpetologists worry is that if this fungus gets to the U.S., um, are we importing pet salamanders these days, guys? Anyway, if it gets to the U.S. and gets out in the field, it's going to be really, really awful. Not documented in the US just yet. Okay, uh, now we'll shift gears and talk about the alligator snapping turtle for just a second. Um, and actually, I'm gonna nerd out for just a moment here before we move on from this one. Um, there's a global amphibian assessment was done, uh, kind of updating things in 2022. It evaluated 8,011 species. 40% of the species uh, evaluated are globally threatened, and 91% of the deterioration is caused by disease and habitat loss. So the amphibian situation is pretty dire. I mean, really, when 40% of them are at risk of extinction, that's bad. All right, back to the alligator snapping turtle. Um, I'm indebted to an organization called Texas Turtles. Some of you know them. Some of you have heard Carl or Viviana talk. They do great talks. This photo comes from them. And the deal about the alligator snapping turtle is it's state listed as threatened. It's the largest freshwater turtle in North America. Males can get up to 211 pounds in Texas. That's a big old turtle. And if you see photos of the researchers handling them, it looks like, you know, whoa, 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 you're going to get bitten. They have shorter necks than common snappers. They can't reach around and bite you as easily as a common snapper would. So researchers will handle them by the shell edges, and they know how to do it safely. But a bite is bad. I mean, there is a study. So, like, you know, you've heard about broomsticks. Those are just tales that people tell. May or may not have any truth to them. But there is a study on the books showing a near amputation of a finger from an alligator snapping turtle. So it truly is a dangerous bite. You don't want to be bitten by these guys. Um, so Texas Turtles has been researching them for years. They know them really well. And what I understand from them is that the main threats to these alligator snapping turtles is from poaching and from trot lines. Um, they're elusive. They stay hidden a lot. I mean, they're in bayous and swamps, and you know, people don't see them that much. They do bask sometimes, but people don't see them a lot. But they're commoner than people expect, according to Texas Turtles. Like there's a study population in the Trinity River here in Tarrant County. They can be found here, but the biggest threats to them are poaching. A lot of that is people from from Louisiana coming. At least the stories I'm familiar with is from Louisiana, because Louisiana doesn't they don't protect theirs, and they've pretty much fished theirs out. So they'll come to Texas and try to get more and bigger alligator snappers illegally to take them back to Louisiana. And trout lines, and I'm a Texas country. I'm not that much of a Texas country boy, so I didn't know that much about trout lines. But trout lines are these lines that people will bait, and they'll have like floating bottles, to on a series of baited hooks laid out across a river or a big pond or something like that, and they just leave them there, and they come back later to collect whatever fish they've caught. Well, if an alligator snapping turtle takes the bait, it may drown, and that's the danger from trout lines. So that's the story about alligator snapping turtles. They are really vulnerable to collection. I read a story. I read a study some years ago. Talked about really if annually, if you lose like 10% of them, that you wind up getting rid of them. It doesn't take the loss of that many turtles for them to disappear. All right, let's talk about sea turtles, because you remember those are the ones in Texas, the few reptiles that are state listed as endangered are all sea turtles. And the deal with sea turtles is that they face some serious threats. One of them is disorientation, and that's largely during nesting and when hatchlings hatch. If there are human lights like parking lots or roads or that kind of thing, it disorients them. They use the light of stars to navigate, and so if you got street lights and all that disorients them, they'll go the wrong way. They get eaten. They get lost. Marine pollution is one threat to them, certainly including plastics, including other things as well. But I think you've all seen photos of sea turtles that have eaten plastic bags, that wound up with a straw stuck in their nose, that are drowning because of being tangled up in nets that have been lost. All of that kind of stuff is a factor for sea turtles. And then poaching, and then habitat loss, where there's beach loss, is a factor for them. If you have a beach that could be a nesting beach, and you have four-wheelers and cars and people up and down the beach all the time, then you can't use that beach, and that doesn't work. And then nest and hatchling predation is a big deal with sea turtles as well. These big ones like that Kemp's Ridley, in the middle is Kemp's Ridley. It is definitely a severely endangered sea turtle. They get really big. There's not much, there's certainly nothing on the beach that's going to be a predator of these adult turtles, but the babies, the gulls and everything else, will eat those things. So predation is a big deal for them. The folks that you might keep in mind, down at the bottom photo there, is Donna Shaver in the hat, and Amy Bonka next to her. And Donna Shaver is famous for having worked incredibly hard for years on sea turtle conservation. She does a lot of great work, and you can find her in the internet. Anyway, that's that. Okay, let's go back to looking at the definitions for things like endangered and threatened. Probably all of you at least have heard of the Endangered Species Act of 1973. And that federal law has done a lot of good. It helped recover bald eagles. It helped recover alligators by listing a species that was known to be endangered and giving it some protection from being collected or killed, and up until recently, protection of some habitat. In fact, one of its most important provisions was designation of critical habitat. So what that means is, we talked about this earlier. If there's a species we want to protect, but it's got nowhere to live anymore, it can't pack its bags and move to LA. It's just going to be gone. If there's no place that's suitable for it to live, then it will die off. So there was a provision in the law that allowed for a designation of critical habitat. As you can imagine, that has been politically the most controversial, the most problematic part of it, because you want to designate critical habitat that you can't screw up. Well, that means you can't, put a lot of drilling rigs on it. You can't, plow it and plant it for grazing land or farmland. You can't do human stuff with critical habitat. if it's going to wipe out the species. I mean, the law didn't say that you can't do anything, but what it said is that it can't result in crucial harm. And so anyway, we'll talk about that in a minute. In the definitions of the law, endangered means a species is in danger of extinction throughout all or significant portion of its range. So think about something that's in trouble. Well, that might apply to the box turtle. You remember when we looked at the nature serve maps, there were several states where it's shown as secure. And if they really are secure there, then that might keep them from being listed because they're not in danger of extinction through a significant portion of its range. And then threatened means a species is likely to become endangered within the foreseeable future. So those are the definitions from the law. So let's look at the Louisiana pine snake. What can I tell you? NatureServe says that it's critically imperiled. In Texas, it's granted threatened status only. Threatened? Well, you remember what we talked about, right? Unless it's federally listed, it can't be state listed as endangered. Now, the Louisiana pine snake was never common. It only existed rather in a few counties in East Texas where there were longleaf pine savannas. That's really the habitat that it depends on, is longleaf pine savannas. It's probably gone in Texas. At least the researchers tend to agree that there's a good possibility. It hasn't been seen in a long time in Texas, and it's probably gone in Texas. There are zoos working on repopulating parts of Louisiana. There are some zoos working on captive breeding and reintroduction programs. And Toby Hibbets is a researcher that's working in Texas. I talked to him about this, and he said there's one site in Texas that's being considered for reintroduction. So those of you who know Texas, think about south of Sam Rayburn Reservoir. That's south of Angelina National Forest. That area is kind of near Jasper. There's enough longleaf pine habitat that maybe it would support a population. Remember, they're not going to go reintroduce pine snakes in a place like, for example, the place that comes to my mind is the Roy Larson Sandyland down in the Big Thicket. Some of you have been there, I bet. There's a nature conservancy place, and it has some longleaf pine savanna, but it's not very big, and it's not big enough to support a population of these guys. So they're not going to go do it there. They need enough space that they could actually get a population going. And they may try, but for now, it may be gone in Texas. Okay. How about the Houston toad? A lot of you have heard of the Houston toad. It is a Texas endemic, meaning it's found in Texas and nowhere else. And matter of fact, it needs sandy, pine forested savanna habitat. It was found near Houston, thus it's called the Houston toad. It's not found near Houston anymore because, those of you who know Houston, you know why. Habitat loss and degradation, right? But if you know that area northwest of Houston and up toward Bastrop, you get some of that stuff. And Bastrop, particularly around the state park, is pretty good habitat for them. The toad was wiped out in the 2011 fire in Bastrop, but they are trying to repopulate them now. The Houston Zoo is one of the partners. Parks and Wildlife is one of the partners. Amphibian and Reptile Conservancy is one of the partners in this effort. And they have Houston toads in captivity that they breed, and then they head start them for a time until they get, no, they don't do that. They get the eggs, and they go release eggs in these shallow ponds in this sandy pine woodland habitat. And they're hopeful that maybe they can get them going again. So that's just another conservation story of some of the herps that are famous for being endangered. This one is actually listed as endangered federally and state. Um, and what that means is that there's a shot at protecting some habitat. Mostly listing in Texas for endangered means you can't go kill them. But at any rate, okay, listing an animal as endangered or threatened is a political as well as a scientific act. And that's where things get so incredibly complicated. Adding a species to a list, calling it endangered or threatened, number one, it can imply responsibility and blame. So, like, why did you bad people do this? And also, it indicates an action is needed, an action that we may not be willing to do. That needed action can interfere with human activities and profits. So that if you wanted to protect pine savanna for Louisiana pine snake, you can't um, you can't clear cut the area and turn it into watermelon patches or tree farms with one of the other pine species. You can't do that, or the pine snake dies. So if you list it as endangered, that's going to interfere with human profit making, and that could be a real problem. The Endangered Species Act, recent changes that you need to know about. Some of you already know about it probably. The current administration, uh, they did a couple of things that are worth keeping track of. One is they removed the definition of harm. So when you look at the definitions in the law, there's a definition for take, and take means a number of things, including harm. And there was a separate definition of harm that included habitat modification. If you mess up the habitat so it can't live there anymore, that harms it. Gosh, that seems pretty straightforward, doesn't it? But the administration said, no, you don't need that definition because it's logical enough from the definition of take. And so and there was a comment period which recently ended, and my understanding, unless it's tied up or whatever, like some of these things drag on, sometimes it's hard to know. My understanding is that that is gone now. For a while, there was a comment period. They hadn't actually rescinded that definition. It hadn't happened yet, right? So anybody knows differently, let me know. But I think it now has happened. The other thing that happened, and I realize I'm getting into like really nerd stuff, but if you really want to know about conservation of these species, it doesn't hurt to know about them. So there was a thing called the Chevron doctrine. What happened was that it used to be under the Endangered Species Act that the Fish and Wildlife people, the agency biologists and scientists, people would defer to them. The courts would tend to defer to them if the agency biologists said, "No, you can't do this," or "That species is gone." The court would say, "Okay, that's what the scientists say, so that's what we're going with." Well, and you can imagine the corporations that wanted to do stuff with that land, they weren't real fond of that, and they challenged what's called the Chevron doctrine, and that challenge was successful, meaning that the courts can no longer defer to agency interpretations of what the law calls for. That what a corporate attorney says needs to also be considered, along with and the agency biologist doesn't trump that. So to speak. Okay, enough about the Endangered Species Act. It's been a powerful, wonderful thing. Hopefully it can be again. So here's an example of the ESA problems with the dune sagebrush lizard. And this lizard has a long history in Texas, a long, difficult history. And that is that Fish and Wildlife wanted to list. So, let me start with how it lives. I'm going to actually do this and come back. So here's where it lives. I took this photo in Monaghan Sand Dunes State Park. These lizards live in what's called sand dunes blowouts. And a blowout is an area where the sand is sort of bowl shaped like this. And particularly, they need sand dunes that have Sheri oak growing on them or around them. So if you look at the top of these dunes, what you're looking at is an oak species. Wow. Like, you know that some oaks can be short, but man, that's short, isn't it? That is a little oak species, Sheri oak, and it helps anchor the sand. It helps any living things thermoregulate, provide some shade. It may help stabilize any water issues there. Sheri oak is important to this ecosystem in these sand dunes. And the dunes sagebrush lizard, which is here, is adapted very specifically to that habitat, and they basically can't live anywhere else. So Fish and Wildlife wanted to list them a long time ago. Texas fought it. Texas wanted to have, they wanted to rely on voluntary conservation efforts where the corporations, and that would be the oil companies, the people that like to drill and frack, and now the people that mine for sand for fracking, those people want to use the dunes, and those people were enlisted to have voluntary conservation agreements. The idea being that if you don't do something, the feds may step up and it may really mess up what you're doing. So they got them to sign on to some voluntary agreements, but the voluntary agreements, and I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail. Basically, they're not super powerful. They're really voluntary. You can step away from them. Basically, a lot of companies did, to where now there's very few signatories to it. It wasn't enough to protect the lizard. So Fish and Wildlife came back in again and said, yeah, we're going to list it. And they listed it. And Texas promptly sued. And so there's now a Texas lawsuit against the U.S. Fish and Wildlife for listing the dune sagebrush lizard because they didn't follow the rules or somehow they're in error. But so let's look at science for a minute, okay? So Toby Hevitz comes up again, and his mentor Lee Fitzgerald at A&M. These guys have done lots and lots of conservation work in Texas, and Lee and Toby have done things like this. They studied to find they won't even cross a road like a caliche road unless it's got sand on it. Like they're not leaving the sand, right? Again, they rely on Sheri oak dunes. It can't just be a bare sand dune. And they even tried taking some lizards to an area where the dune sagebrush lizard had been extirpated, right? Killed off. A nearby area in this region of Texas where it had sand dunes and Sheri oak and the habitat looked good. And they released these lizards to try to start them up again. And at first it was looking kind of good, but then after a while they all died off. So so far the best science would tell you, no, you can't transplant them, can't do that. And you can't make them live somewhere else. They can't pack their bags and live and move to LA. They have to live in sand dunes with Sheri oak. And that's a real problem. Have you been out there to Midland, Odessa lately? It's just nothing but, drilling platforms and these huge, enormous factory level sand mining outfits that hose up the sand and put them in big trucks to be taken somewhere to support fracking. And there's a lot of money to be made for that. So we're suing the feds. Okay, enough on that. I know, guys, I'm going on and on about it, but here's another conservation story. NatureServe says that these guys are vulnerable in Texas, and again, whoops, sorry. Let me go back. I'm trying to move something where I can see my own writing. Apparently secure overall, but vulnerable in Texas. That's what NatureServe says. Most of us know that horny toads used to live here where we lived. If we're old enough, we remember them. They're gone. They're gone from much of Texas, but there's still places where they do like okay. And there's a couple of zoos really involved in captive breeding and reintroduction. I'm not going to go into very much of that. I'd be glad to tell you the story. I wrote about it for Green Source. If you go to their website, you can look up my story a couple of years ago. I'd be glad to talk your ear off about horned lizards, but I know we're going to run out of time. So I want to recommend, if you really like horny toads, there's this DVD that was like an indie film production. They did a great job, man. These guys did a really good job. They got footage of horned lizards. There's plenty of footage of horned lizards doing what they do and where they live. And they interviewed a bunch of scientists. They interviewed people from the Horned Lizard Conservation Society. There's lots of interviews with people that know their stuff about what happened to them, and stories about, old Rip, which is actually not true. The horned lizard that supposedly was buried in the courthouse, and when they opened it up, like decades and decades later, it's still alive. That's a cool story, not true, but anyway, horned lizards are very neat, and that's a really neat film. You can find it on the internet, and it's not very expensive. So there's that. So Fort Worth and San Antonio zoos work on captive breeding, head starting, and reintroduction. That's going pretty well in the western Edwards Plateau and in the South Texas plains. And again, I said I wasn't going to, we need to move on, so I won't do a lot with that. But grab me if you want the story. All right. So I'm not totally bouncing around with topics. This will become relevant in a moment. If what's going on now is like what we grew up with, we figure it's pretty okay, right? It seems normal. That's what's going on. So it's like the dog here. Yeah, this is fine. The idea being because, yeah, it's what he's used to. So it's just normal. And that gets us into a discussion of the shifting baseline syndrome. And it affects how we perceive the need for action. So the deal is that what we've experienced in our lifetime can feel normal. It's how things have always been, or it seems that way, and maybe how they should be. So take a 20-year-old who's not seriously invested in herp conservation and tell them, yeah, we need to protect horny toads and we need to reintroduce them and we need to do all this stuff with horny toads. And that 20-year-old is thinking, "Oh, horny toads here? Nah, why would you do that? It's no big deal. We never had horny toads here." Because that's their baseline for what's normal. For each generation, a changed world becomes the new normal. And this is what's described as shifting baseline syndrome. And so what that means is that, you need people who are motivated to try to bring things back in some way like they were or correct some problem. And if you grow up and in your period of growing up in the last 15, 20 years, things have been just like this, you don't miss box turtles and horny toads. You don't miss a lot of the things that are gone. And so it's normal, so it's no big deal. And that's the relevance of shifting baseline syndrome. And I guess what it means is that it's helpful to educate the public, helpful to educate young people in particular about, how things used to be. Believe me, I mean, I'm 75 years old. I was running around the creeks and fields in the middle 60s, and I could tell you stories. You don't want to hear my stories. I could tell you stories about all the stuff we used to have, and it was really different, guys. It really was different. Some of you who are in my same age range know this. It was different back then, and it'd be nice to have some of that again, right? Okay. While we're talking about our own motivation, our own capacity to care about things, I wanted to share with you this quote. The book is coming back to life. Joanna Macy, in particular, is someone who, if you care about conservation, if you care about the things that are going on in the poly crisis, and finding some basis for what can we do, and is there a basis for any hope? Is there a basis for anything we could do that would be productive? You might want to read Joanna Macy. But the quote here about how bad it is now is, now, however, perils facing life on Earth are so massive and unprecedented that they're hard even to take in. The very danger signals that should rivet our attention and summon up the blood and bond us in collective action tend to have the opposite effect. They make us want to pull down the blinds and busy ourselves with other things. So that's part of what we're facing, those of us who want to conserve things, is that it's not that nobody knows. It's some people know and they're so overwhelmed that they can't do anything. So what the message for us about conservation is, we need to defend against getting to a point where we are so overwhelmed that we're powerless, because it's just a normal human attribute to retreat into something if we're completely overwhelmed. And today's pretty bad, huh? I mean, like you can see how some people might do that. So, but we need to do stuff for guys like this. This is a Woodhouse's toad, a face that maybe only a mother could love, but I love him too. Anyway, here's some of the things that we can do is to support organizations that do good work. And we might like when you think about, so who does good work? That might be judged in terms of Whit Gibbons' 6 described threats. Remember back when we started this presentation so many years ago, we talked about habitat loss, we talked about invasive exotic species, we talked about pollution, we talked about climate change, we talked about unsustainable use. Any of these organizations that can do something about that may be doing valuable work. The Nature Conservancy is definitely on my list. This is a short list. There's other organizations worth supporting, obviously, but these are a short list of some that are important. The Nature Conservancy, because of the way they conserve habitat, that one's really important to me. The Native Prairies Association of Texas, for the exact same reason. Prairies are disappearing, and these guys help protect them, so they are heroes in my book. The Orion Society, which you may not have heard of, this one got its start with indigo snakes in the eastern U.S. And they were doing there was some people, zoo and university people, doing a presentation, and this girl says to her daddy, "Hey, can we have one like this?" And of course, daddy explains, "No, they're endangered. They're almost gone. We can't have one." And this girl named Orion was evidently growing up in a pretty wealthy family, because due to her interest, her dad and her family helped establish this society, which has done longleaf habitat preservation in the southeastern U.S. They have done an indigo snake conservation. I'm not going to go into indigo snakes. I love them, but it's not in Texas, so, or the eastern is not in Texas, so. But look them up; they're really cool, and that includes some captive breeding and reintroduction. They've done some work in the Northeast. They do work with turtles, including gopher tortoises, spotted turtles, other endangered turtles. They do a lot of really good work with really good science. So I love the Orion Society. The Amphibian and Reptile Conservancy, which is an organization that does a lot of good work. Texas Turtles, our own local guys, doing research in Texas and public education. They have a great website. If you need to know about a particular turtle, you can go look it up at texasturtles.org. They do lots of good work, and they're very worthy of support. And Sea Turtle Incorporated, when you think about Donna Shaver that I mentioned earlier, she's affiliated with this group. Sea Turtle Inc. does a lot of really good work with sea turtles. So those are some organizations worth supporting. An example of how some of these organizations help, these are habitat management guidelines for herps for landowners, and it's downloadable for free. It comes from PARC, that is Partners in Amphibian and Reptile Conservation. They're tied up with ARC, the Amphibian and Reptile Conservancy, which sponsors them. PARC has done a lot of really good work, and these guidelines are about maintenance of existing habitats and restoration of degraded habitats. There's a booklet for each of several regions of the U.S. This one that I've got reproduced here is for southwestern U.S., and it talks about all these topics over on the right. If you're interested, go download it. It's really cool. This is the kind of thing that private landowners, ranchers, and other folks um, um, could make use of, could use and look over as how can we make our place more, herp friendly. So there's that. Um, and what about releasing more of them? We've talked about that a little bit, but you need to know what's a workable strategy versus just shoveling more herbs into the wood chipper. So first, let's talk about translocation. A lot of us have tried this. A lot of us are still faced with it when, like, a box turtle turns up in grapevine and in urbanized, sprawled grapevine where it's traffic and lawns and no place for the turtle to live. What are you going to do with it? You're going to take it somewhere and turn it loose? I mean, that's probably the least bad of your options. But remember, box turtles establish home ranges, and other herps do too. It's areas that they know, and they may have considerable site fidelity, meaning that if you release them somewhere, they just wander. And we've seen this with box turtles. We've seen it with rattlesnakes. We've seen it with, I can tell you of a study with hognose snakes. Really, a lot of species that have been studied, what turns up is they don't do well if you turn them loose somewhere else. If you release them somewhere and radio track them and go find them again, you find that the ones that were uh, released somewhere new have all died, or most of them have died, maybe. Soft release helps. A soft release is what Leela does. Those of you familiar with Leela over near Lake Louisville, those guys are doing some box turtle reintroduction, and they captive breed them and they grow them up right there. So if you put box turtles in a pen in the place where you're going to let them go, and you let them uh, acclimate to that area, there's at least a better chance that they may stick around. So that helps. But translocation it's a pretty problematic strategy. It's not as good as captive breeding and release, which may also be really tough. But with captive breeding and release, what you want to do is to head start them, like the horned lizard stuff I talked about, like some box turtle efforts. You get a box turtle. There's a study that I was going to tell you about, and any of these studies, if you want them, email me or whatever, and I can send it to you or show you where to go look it up. But there was um, a study with box turtles. I'm finding it. Bear with me. What they did is they had started 32 eastern box turtles, and they had started them for either 9 months or 21 months. And then they soft released them. Like I mentioned, they pinned them up for a while and then let them go. They were big enough at that point to put radios on, so they radio tracked them so they could look them up and find them and see what's going on with them, later on. So these are 32 eastern box turtles. A total of 14 of those survived the first season, and only 3 of them were alive in the second season. Now, part of the results of the study was the longer you had started them, the better they did. So that's one reason I mentioned the study, is it does give some support for head starting even box turtles who really do pretty poorly, but at least you got some of them going. But that's terrible statistics, right? That's not a huge study. 32 box turtles. That's not a lot to study. To get really great results, you'd want to do that with a whole bunch more and see, is it always what you get? But out of 32, you wind up with 3 alive. That's pretty terrible. So all these strategies, like, the best strategy is protecting the land and habitat, right? But the worst thing we could do is just say, oh, me and my buddy, we're going to catch some and turn them loose somewhere. And we really aren't experts in the field, but we kind of know these animals, or we think we know them because we grew up around them. Sorry, guys. If you release them into unworkable habitat, if you have a program that's not designed to succeed, it's just doomed to fail. So I, a friend the other night was saying, well, man, this is going to be just a doomsday presentation, isn't it? I hate for it to be that way, but it's hard to make this presentation real, upbeat. Hey, guys, um, But there's things like the recovery of the American alligator. There's things like what they're doing with reintroduction of horned lizards in suitable habitat that are having some success, and they do give us some reason for hope. So what else can we do? We can add to knowledge. We can document our observations on INAT or some other place. We can assist in local monitoring and restoration programs. If you find a program locally that's working on some of these herps, help them out. Some of you are going out to the Fort Worth Nature Center and their work with alligators. Good for you. That's a good thing to do. Some of what we do is bearing witness, even if we cannot hold on to them. I know that doesn't seem to make sense. If we work on conservation and we're watching these, box turtles or whatever disappear, and we can't seem to do much about it, it's like, well, why are we even doing this? But one thing I think has some value is bearing witness, even if we can't hold on to them. We become the people who understand what loss is about, who understand what can be lost, and who may help guide future efforts in maybe some other area. I think it's important to bear witness. We can certainly do political advocacy. Any of you who are interested in political advocacy, the more our governments, our representatives can help support conservation, the better. Some days that looks pretty hard, but we can do it, and it's worth doing. It's worth keeping on doing. And we can take care of our own energy, love, and capacity to act. So remember that remember that quote, the massive perils facing life on Earth make us want to shut down, to be distracted. That's a reason to take care of yourself. Effective action comes mostly from communities of people acting together. So if you can, don't do it in isolation. Get with other people. Do it as a part of a community. Find a way of joining others. Hold yourself accountable for doing something. But this is really important. Don't hold yourself accountable for everything. There's stuff that we're going to lose. But there's stuff that we're going to win. Don't hold yourself accountable for everything working out great. Reconnect other people with nature, right? The more people we can reconnect. I mean, that's those of us master naturalists, people that are with preserves. That's an important piece of what we're doing. And reflect on what we have and express gratitude and spend time recharging in nature. And that is take care of yourself. Find the positives. Don't always focus on all the losses, and recharge yourself. Take care of yourself. We both for your own sake and because we all need you in the conservation effort. And that's what I've got, man. I went on and on, right? Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm on time. I didn't go over, but that is what I have for anybody that's interested. These are the 3 books of mine. And if you want to get a hold of me, masmith.tx@gmail, and the website /blog is livesinnature.com. So I hope this has been helpful for you and not just a bummer. But here we are. I'm going to look at the chat and see if there's anything in the chat. Probably a lot of you are thinking, oh my God, no, I don't want to ask any questions. It'll just make it worse, right? But if you have any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them.
First of all, I want to thank Michael for presenting this great series, and enjoyed in some sobering information as well, but that contributes to our understanding and our ability to serve as ambassadors in the best way that we can. And we appreciate very much, and also appreciate the sponsorship of Crosstimbers Master Naturalists, and
Right.
really appreciate all of y'all sharing throughout the class. Appreciate it very much.
I can't reemphasize that point enough. Those of you who are master naturalists, it's why I dedicated mindfulness in Texas nature to you, because what you do is really important. So if tonight's been a downer, celebrate what you do. and everybody else too. I mean, those again, those of you who work in restoration efforts or whatever, yeah, I love you guys. You're great. Anyway, any other questions or any questions rather?
And just for those of you who may not be familiar, if any of you, I know a lot of you are master naturalists and others that may be familiar, but if you're not, please know that there's a local chapter in Fort Worth, the Crosstimbers Master Naturalists, ctmn.org. And I'm representing the Friends of Sheri Capehart Nature Preserve. And we have a website and an email newsletter free that comes out every month. And just go to our website, friendsofscmp.org, and sign up for our newsletter. And we have activities, we have work days, and we try to take care of 60 acres of great habitat and the critters that live there.
Yep. Come see our Texas spiny
Thanks,
lizards.
Erica.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you for doing this. Much appreciated. I loved it.
Well,
I
thanks
also
so
wanted
much.
to mention, I'm sorry, Michael, go ahead.
No, I just thanks so much for that comment. Thanks.
And for people who may not be familiar with Crosstimbers Master Naturalist, the even if you're not a master naturalist, you can Erica, is there a you can always go to the website, but is the newsletter available to non-members? I know programs are accessible, but how do people know?
Yeah, I believe the newsletter is. I would have to verify that. I can't say 100%, but 99% of our volunteer opportunities are open to the general public. If you're not a member, you can still come work with us and join us in almost everything we do. There's just a few caveats where you have to do like background checks, especially if you're going to be working around children and things like that. Some of the areas do require a background check, but that just takes a little bit of time. So, and anybody can go through that process too. So you can always reach out to us on ctmn.org. Our calendar is updated. Our monthly meetings are open to the general public as well. And if you, had direct questions, I can put my, I'll put my contact in the chat as well. I'm the training director, so that goes directly to me. So if you do have questions or need help in finding areas to volunteer, you can always holler, and I'd be glad to help direct you.
Great. Thank you, Erica.
Yeah, thank you guys. This has been wonderful. I've loved it. So thank you for doing this.
I second that.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. I mean, this, yeah, I really appreciate that.
Does anybody have any more questions about either conservation or herps and amphibians in general? Reptiles and amphibians, I'm sorry.
And if you have any feedback or suggestions or things that we ought to do either at Friends of Sheri Capehart or wherever, please feel free to email. I would love to hear any feedback that you have, including like, boy, I wish you had covered this or whatever. If there's any suggestions, I'd love to hear them.
Gotcha.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jan. Tonight was definitely a call to action, so I appreciate the information.
Great. Thank you, Christine. Very glad to have had all of y'all participate.
Oh, and we can go ahead and shut down the recorder, I think.